Today, you'll discover the story of a wild orphan girl whose life changed forever when outlaws left her to drown, only to be saved by a mysterious, silent cowboy who would become her only family. Get ready for an emotional journey filled with unexpected twists. Before we begin this incredible story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening to this story from. The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail that wound through the barren landscape of 1837. A lone wagon, weathered and creaking with each rotation of its wheels, carried what remained of the Whitman family's worldly possessions. Inside, 12-year-old Lily Whitman pressed her face against the canvas, her wild auburn curls escaping from beneath her bonnet as she watched the endless expanse of prairie grass sway in the hot wind. "Lily, get back inside properly," her mother Sarah called weakly from where she lay on a makeshift bed of blankets, her face pale and drawn from the fever that had plagued her for days. Her father, Thomas, guided the oxen with steady hands, though worry etched deep lines across his sun-weathered face. They were 3 days out from the last settlement, heading toward California with dreams of gold and prosperity. When the outlaws struck, the thunder of hooves came first, rising like a dust storm from the horizon. 6 men, their faces obscured by bandanas, surrounded the wagon with practiced efficiency. Their leader, a man with cold grey eyes and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, raised his pistol. Well, what have we here?" he drawled, his voice like gravel. "Settlers heading west with all their treasures, I reckon." Thomas Whitman slowly raised his hands, trying to keep his voice calm. "Oh, we don't have much. Just supplies for the journey. Take what you need and let us pass." The scarred man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Oh, we'll take what we need, all right. Boys, check the wagon." As the outlaws ransacked their belongings, Lily couldn't contain herself. She burst from the wagon, her small fists clenched. "Leave us alone. My mama's sick." She kicked at the nearest outlaw's shin, her green eyes blazing with fury. The man backhanded her, sending her sprawling in the dust. "Wild little thing, ain't she?" he sneered. "No manners at all." What happened next would haunt the Texas plains for years to come. When Thomas tried to protect his daughter, and a shot rang out. Sarah's scream pierced the air as her husband crumpled to the ground. In her delirium, she stumbled from the wagon, reaching for him, only to meet the same fate. Lily knelt between her parents, her small hands covered. In blood, her screams raw and primal. The leader studied her with those cold eyes, considering. "Can't leave witnesses," he said finally. "But I ain't wasting a bullet on a wild brat. Rio Grande's just over that ridge. Let the river take her." They bound her hands and feet. With rough rope, her struggles fierce despite her small size. She bit, scratched, and fought like a cornered wildcat. But 6 grown men were too much for a 12-year-old girl. They carried her to the edge of the Rio Grande, where the current ran swift and deep. "Any last words, little wildcat?" When the scarred man asked mockingly, Lily spat at him, her eyes burning with a hatred too large for her young heart. "I'll remember your face," she hissed. "Every line, every mark. Someday I'll find you." He laughed and nodded to his men. They threw her into the churning waters, watching as the current immediately seized her small form, pulling her under. The outlaws mounted their horses and rode off, leaving behind the ransacked wagon and the bodies of Thomas and Sarah Whitman, certain that the river had claimed its 3rd victim. But the Rio Grande, though mighty and treacherous, had not reckoned with Lily Whitman's wild spirit. She fought against the ropes, her lungs burning as the muddy water filled her mouth and nose. The current tumbled her like a rag doll, slamming her against hidden rocks. Just when darkness began to creep into the edges of her vision, when her struggles grew weak, a shadow fell across the water. A lone rider sat motionless on his paint horse at the river's edge, his weathered, hat casting shadows across his face. Jake Sullivan, known throughout the territory simply as Silent Jake, had earned his moniker not by choice, but by circumstance. A Comanche arrow had stolen his voice 5 years prior, leaving a jagged scar across his throat. At 32, he lived a solitary existence, communicating through gestures and written words when necessary, preferring the company of his horse to that of people. He had been tracking the Outlaws for 2 days, following their trail of destruction across the Texas frontier. The smoke from the Whitman wagon had drawn him here, but the sight of a small body tumbling in the river changed everything. Without hesitation, Jake spurred his horse into the rushing water. The Rio Grande fought him, trying to claim both horse and rider, but Jake had crossed this river 100 times. He guided his mount with his knees, his eyes locked on the small form that surfaced briefly before being pulled under again. His rope was in his hand before conscious thought, the loop sailing through the air with practiced precision. By pure providence or stubborn will, Lily's bound hands caught the rope as she surfaced one final time. Jake pulled with all his strength, his horse straining against the current. When he finally dragged her onto the bank, she lay still. As death, her lips blue, water streaming from her nose and mouth. Jake worked with desperate efficiency, cutting her bonds and pressing on her chest, willing her to breathe. Long moments passed before she suddenly convulsed, coughing up river water and gasping for air. Her green eyes flew open, wild with terror, and she struck out blindly, her fists connecting with his chest. He caught her wrists gently, his dark eyes trying to convey safety, but Lily was beyond reason. She fought like a wild thing, kicking and biting, until exhaustion finally claimed her. Jake wrapped her in his blanket, noting the blood on her dress that wasn't hers, the raw wounds where the ropes had cut into her skin. He carried her to where he'd left his horse, but when he tried to lift her into the saddle, she came alive. Again, screaming wordlessly and clawing at his face. It took all his patience and strength to secure her, and even then, she continued to struggle until consciousness finally fled. Jake made camp in a sheltered grove of cottonwoods, building a fire to warm her shivering form. He had seen enough. Death to recognize shock when he saw it. Throughout the night, he tended to her, replacing the wet blanket with dry ones from his pack, trickling water between her lips when fever took hold. She woke before dawn, her eyes focusing on him with startling clarity. When she opened her mouth to speak, only a hoarse whisper emerged. Who are you?" Jake pointed to himself, then touched his throat and shook his head. Understanding flickered in her eyes. He couldn't speak. He offered her water from his canteen, which she accepted warily, watching him like a half-wild animal ready to bolt. "They killed them," she said suddenly, her voice stronger. "Mama and Papa, they shot them and threw me in the river." Tears didn't come. Her grief was too raw, too deep for tears. "I have to go back. I have to bury them." Jake nodded solemnly. He had already made that decision. As the sun rose, he lifted her onto his horse, noting how she no longer fought him, though her body remained tense. They rode in silence back to the scene of the massacre. The sight that greeted them would have broken a grown man. Vultures circled overhead, and coyotes had already been at work. Jake dismounted first, trying to shield her from the worst of it, but Lily slid down and walked forward with terrible determination. "Papa always said we should be buried facing west," she said in a small voice. "Toward California, toward our dreams." Together, they dug graves in the hard earth. Jake did most of the physical work while Lily gathered stones to mark the spots. She insisted on helping to move her parents' bodies, her small face set with grim determination. When they finally laid Thomas and Sarah Whitman to rest, Lily stood between the graves, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Papa, Mama, I promise I'll be strong. I promise I'll remember everything you taught me. And I promise Her voice hardened. "I'll find the men who did this." Jake placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and for the first time, she didn't flinch away. As they stood in the fading light, two lost souls brought together by tragedy. Neither could have imagined that this was just the beginning of their journey together. The weeks that followed tested both Jake and Lily in ways neither had anticipated. Jake had lived alone for so long that accommodating another person, especially a traumatized child, challenged every routine he'd established. Lily, for her part, oscillated between periods of eerie silence and explosive outbursts that left them both exhausted. They traveled north, away from the Rio Grande and its bitter memories. Jake had a small cabin in the hill country, a place he'd built with his own hands during his years of solitude. It wasn't much, one room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and two beds he'd fashioned from pine logs, but it was secure and isolated. Lily spoke little during their journey, but Jake noticed how her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, how she startled at every unexpected sound. At night, she woke screaming from nightmares, fighting invisible enemies until Jake could calm her with gentle touches and soothing sounds that rumbled in his chest. Communication between them evolved naturally. Jake had a slate and chalk he used for trading in towns, but he found that Lily understood his gestures almost intuitively. She began creating her own signs, and soon they had developed a language unique to them. A raised fist meant danger, two fingers pointed at the eyes meant watch carefully, and a hand over the heart meant safe. The first time Lily smiled, really smiled, was 3 weeks after the river. Jake had been trying to catch a particularly ornery chicken that had escaped its coop, and the bird led him on a chase that ended with him face first in the mud. When he looked up, covered in muck and chicken feathers, he saw Lily's lips twitch. Then, like sun breaking through storm clouds, she laughed. It was rusty and brief, but it was real. "You look ridiculous," she said, and for the first time since her parents' death, there was something other than pain in her eyes. Jake exaggerated his muddy predicament, making a show of trying to wipe his face and only making it worse. Her laughter grew stronger, and he felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he'd thought lost forever. But the peace was fragile. In the first time they went to town for supplies, Lily transformed. The wild thing that Jake had pulled from the river returned in full force. When a drunk cowboy made the mistake of grabbing her arm, she attacked with savage fury, biting and clawing until Jake had to physically carry her away. "He touched me!" she raged that night, pacing their cabin like a caged wolf. "No one touches me! No one!" Jake understood. He'd seen what violence could do to a person's trust. He began teaching her to channel her wildness, showing her how to throw a knife, how to track, how to read the land. She was a quick study, driven by a combination of natural intelligence and burning need for control. Months passed, and slowly Lily began to heal. She still woke with nightmares, still flinched at unexpected movements, but she also began to show glimpses of the child she might have been. She helped Jake with the horses, proving to have a natural way with animals. She learned to read the weather, to identify edible plants, to move silently through the brush. One evening, as they sat by the fire cleaning rifles, Lily asked, "Why did you save me?" Jake set down his gun and considered how to answer. Finally, he touched his chest, then pointed to her, then made a circular motion that encompassed them both, his sign for family. "I'm not your family," she said, but there was no anger in it, only confusion. "I'm nobody's family anymore." Jake shook his head firmly. He went to his saddlebags and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a small daguerreotype, a woman and a young girl, both smiling at the camera. He pointed to the child, then to himself, then made the sign for gone. Lily studied the picture with sudden understanding. "You had a daughter." He nodded, then pointed to the woman and repeated the sign. "They're both gone," Lily whispered. "That's why you saved me. Because you couldn't save them." Jake's eyes glistened in the firelight, but he shook his head. He pointed to Lily, then to his heart, then made a new sign, both hands clasped together. "Not because of them," Lily translated slowly, "because of me, because I needed saving." They sat in comfortable silence after that, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Lily spoke again, her voice smaller than usual. "Jake, I'm glad you found me. I'm glad I'm not alone." He reached over and squeezed her shoulder gently, and this time she leaned into the touch. But even as they built their strange little family, Lily never forgot the face of the man with the scar. She drew his likeness over and over on Jake's slate, burning every detail into her memory. Jake would find her sometimes, staring at her drawing with an expression that made him deeply uneasy. "I'll know him when I see him," she'd say, "and when I do—" She never finished the sentence, but Jake knew. The wild thing inside her wasn't tamed, it was merely waiting, and he feared what would happen when Lily Whitman finally found the man who'd murdered her parents and tried to drown her in the Rio Grande. 2 years passed in their hidden sanctuary. Lily, now 14, had grown tall and lean, her wild auburn hair reaching past her waist when unbound. Jake had taught her everything he knew, how to shoot straight, track silently, and survive. In the unforgiving Texas wilderness, but more than skills, he'd given her something she'd thought lost forever, a sense of belonging. Their routine was shattered on a crisp October morning when Jake returned from checking his trap lines with a grave expression. He showed Lily a wanted poster he'd found nailed to a tree near the main trail. The face staring back at them was unmistakable, the scarred man who haunted her dreams. "William Bloody Bill Morrison," Lily read aloud. "Wanted for murder, robbery, and kidnapping. $500 reward." Her hands trembled as she held the paper. "He's real. He has a name." Jake took the poster from her and threw it in the fire, shaking his head firmly. He knew that look in her eyes, had seen it building for 2 years. "No," Lily said quietly, "don't protect me from this. I'm not a child anymore." That night, Jake woke to find Lily's bed empty. Her rifle was gone, along with provisions, and one of the horses, the wanted poster, which he'd thought burned, lay smoothed out on the table with a note. "I have to do this. Please understand. I'll come back. L." Panic seized him. Jake saddled his horse in record time, following her trail by moonlight. She had a 6-hour head start, but he knew her habits, her patterns. She was heading for Coyote Springs, the town mentioned on the poster as Morrison's last known location. He found her just after dawn, crouched behind a boulder overlooking the town. Her rifle was trained on the saloon below. Jake approached carefully, making enough noise so she'd hear him coming. "And to go home, Jake," she said without turning. "This is my fight." He moved beside her, pulling out his slate to write, but she pushed it away. "I know what you'll say, that revenge won't bring them back, that it'll change me. But I'm already changed. He changed me the day he threw me in that river." Jake gently turned her to face him, and she saw tears in his eyes. He touched his chest, then hers, then made their sign for family. Then he drew his finger across his throat and shook his head violently. "You think I'll die?" Lily's voice cracked. "I'm maybe, but I'd rather die trying than live knowing he's out there, free, while my parents rot in the ground." The sound of horses interrupted them. 6 riders approached the saloon, and even from a distance, Lily recognized the lead rider's scarred face. Her hands tightened on the rifle, but Jake placed his hand over hers, shaking his head. He pointed to the other riders, then to her, then made a slashing motion. She understood. 6 against 1 was suicide. "Then what?" she hissed. "Let him go." Jake pointed to himself, then to her, then held up two fingers. Together he pulled out his slate and wrote quickly, "Not revenge, justice." They watched Morrison and his gang enter the saloon. Jake wrote again, "Sheriff, evidence, legal." Lily wanted to argue, but she saw the wisdom in his words. They spent the next 3 days gathering information, Jake using his connections among the local ranchers, while Lily watched the gang's movements. They learned Morrison had killed a family just 2 weeks prior, leaving witnesses this time. On the 4th night, Morrison made a mistake. Drunk and overconfident, he separated from his gang, stumbling toward the outhouse. Behind the saloon, Lily moved like a shadow, Jake beside her. When Morrison emerged, he found himself facing the barrel of Lily's rifle. "Hello, Bill," she said quietly. "Remember me?" Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by disbelief. "The river brat. Impossible." "Not impossible. Just very, very angry." Her finger tightened on the trigger. Morrison laughed, nervously. "You won't shoot. You're just a little girl playing with Daddy's gun." "My daddy's dead," Lily said coldly. "You saw to that." Jake stepped from the shadows, his own gun trained on Morrison. The outlaw's eyes darted between them, calculating odds. The mute, Morrison sneered, "Should have known." "Well, what now? You kill me, my boys will hunt you down." Lily smiled, and it was a terrible thing. "No, Bill, we're not going to kill you. We're going to do something worse." She raised her voice. "Sheriff Matthews, he's all yours." The sheriff and his deputies emerged from their hiding spots, guns drawn. Jake had spent 2 days convincing them to attempt this capture, providing evidence of Morrison's crimes. As they cuffed Morrison, he snarled at Lily, "This ain't over, girl." "Yes, it is," she replied. "You're going to hang for what you did, and I'm going to watch." The trial was swift. With multiple witnesses and evidence, Morrison was sentenced to hang within the week. On the appointed day, Lily stood in the crowd, Jake beside her. As they placed the noose around Morrison's neck, he searched the crowd until he found her face. "Any last words?" the sheriff asked. Morrison never took his eyes off Lily. "I remember you too, girl, every detail." "Good," Lily called back. "Remember me in hell." The lever was pulled. Lily watched without flinching as the man who destroyed her world met his end. When it was over, she turned to Jake, and he saw something had changed in her eyes. The wild thing was still there, but tempered now with something else. Justice satisfied, a burden lifted. "Can we go home now?" she asked quietly. Jake nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as they walked away from the gallows, away from the past, toward whatever future they would build together. 5 more years passed in the Texas Hill Country. Lily, now 19, had grown into a formidable woman. Her wild beauty turned heads in town, but her reputation as Silent Jake's adopted daughter and her own fierce independence kept most suitors at bay. Those who tried to court her quickly learned that Lily Whitman was nobody's typical frontier woman. Jake watched with pride and some amusement as she sent yet another hopeful cowboy packing, this one nursing a blackened eye after making unwanted advances. Their sign language had evolved into something so complex and nuanced that they could hold entire conversations across a crowded room. To outsiders, their bond seemed almost mystical. The cabin had expanded over the years. Jake had added 2 more rooms and a proper porch where they spent evenings watching the sunset. Lily had insisted on a vegetable garden, though she still preferred hunting to farming. Their life had found a rhythm, peaceful but never soft, civilized but never fully tamed. Everything changed the day the letter arrived. Jake had ridden to town for supplies, leaving Lily to tend the horses. When he returned, his face bore an expression she'd never seen before. He handed her an official-looking envelope addressed to Miss Lily Whitman, in care of Jake Sullivan. "How did they find me?" she asked, turning the letter over in her hands. The return address was from a law firm in San Antonio. Jake shrugged, but his eyes encouraged her to open it. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and read, "Dear Miss Whitman, we regret to inform you of the passing of your great-uncle, Cornelius Whitman, of Boston, Massachusetts. As his only surviving relative, you have been named sole beneficiary of his considerable estate, valued at approximately $500,000, including properties in Boston, New York, and California. Your presence is required to claim your inheritance." The letter fell from her numb fingers. Jake picked it up, read it, then looked at her with raised eyebrows. $500,000, Lily whispered. "I didn't even know I had a great-uncle." She paced the cabin, her mind racing. "Papa mentioned his family back east, but they disowned him when he married Mama. Said she wasn't good enough, being Irish and all." Jake wrote on his slate. "What will you do?" Lily stared at the letter as if it might bite her. "I don't know. I don't need their money. I have everything I need here." She looked at Jake, sudden fear in her eyes. "You don't want me to go, do you?" He crossed to her quickly, cupping her face in his weathered hands. He shook his head firmly, then pointed to her, to himself, to the cabin. This was home, but then he pointed to the letter and raised his shoulders in a question. Her choice. They talked late into the night, or rather, Lily talked, while Jake listened and responded with signs and written words. By morning, she had decided, "I'll go," she said, "not for the money, but to understand where Papa came from. But I'm coming back. This is my home. You're my family." The journey to San Antonio took 3 days. Jake insisted on accompanying her, despite her protests that she could take care of herself. The law office was a revelation, all marble and mahogany, with clerks who looked at their trail-worn clothes with barely concealed disdain. Miss Whitman, the senior partner, Mr. Blackwood, greeted her with obvious surprise. "We expected, that is, we weren't certain you were still alive. The last anyone heard, your family was heading west in 37. "They died," Lily said simply. "I survived." The legal proceedings took a week. Lily signed papers, met with bankers, and learned the extent of her inheritance. Cornelius Whitman had been a shipping magnate with no children of his own. His will, updated just before his death, left everything to "my nephew Thomas's daughter, should she still live." He regretted the estrangement, Blackwood explained. He hired investigators to find your family, but the trail went cold in Texas. He never gave up hope. Lily felt a strange mix of emotions, anger that this uncle had let pride separate him from her father, sadness for what might have been, and an odd gratitude that he'd tried to make amends, even if too late. On their last night in San Antonio, Jake found Lily on the hotel balcony, staring at the stars. She had traded her trail clothes for a proper dress at the lawyer's insistence, but she looked uncomfortable in the fine fabric. "I could live in Boston," she said without preamble. "Have servants, wear silk dresses, attend society balls. Be a proper lady like Mama always wanted." She turned to Jake. "But that's not me. It never will be." Jake smiled and signed. "What do you want?" "I want to use the money to help people like us," she said. "Orphans, widows, people. The world has beaten down. I want to build something good from all this pain." She paused. "And I want to go home with you." Jake's eyes misted as he pulled her into a fierce hug. She clung to him. This man who'd saved her in every way a person could be saved. They returned to the hill country, but not to isolation. Lily used her inheritance to establish the Whitman Foundation, building schools and orphanages across Texas. She hired teachers, funded medical clinics, and created safe havens for women and children in need. But she always returned to the cabin, to Jake, to the life they'd built together. Years later, when people asked about her story, Lily would say, "I was drowning, and a silent cowboy pulled me from the water. He couldn't speak, but he taught me everything worth saying. He wasn't my blood, but he was my family. He saved me, and together we saved others." Jake lived to see Lily marry a good man, a doctor who worked in one of her clinics, and who understood that Jake would always be her true father. He lived to hold her children, teaching them the same signs he'd taught her, and when he finally passed, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 71, Lily was beside him, holding his hand. At his funeral, hundreds came to pay their respects, people whose lives had been touched by the silent cowboy and his wild adopted daughter. Lily stood before them, no longer wild, but still fierce, and spoke. Jake Sullivan never said a word in all the years I knew him, but he spoke volumes through his actions. He taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when you're drowning. It's about who stays when staying is hard. It's about love that asks for nothing but gives everything. He was my father in every way that mattered, and I was proud to be his daughter. She placed a river stone on his grave, one she'd kept from the Rio Grande, from the day everything changed. Then she walked back to the cabin they'd shared, where her own children waited, where Jake's memory lived in every corner, where a wild orphan girl had learned to be whole again. The Whitman Foundation continued for generations, helping thousands of lost souls find their way, and always, at its heart, was the story of a silent cowboy who jumped into a raging river and pulled out not just a drowning girl, but a daughter, a future, and a legacy of love that would outlive them all.